Thank you, Madam President. Over the course of the last year and a half, I've come down to the floor fairly regularly to tell some simple stories about victims of gun violence all across the country. The idea being that if the data, this overwhelming data of those killed through gun violence, 31,000 a year, 2,600 a month, 86 a day, if these mind-numbing numbers don't move this body to action, then maybe the voices of the victims, the stories of the victims of gun violence may eventually thaw the ice of this Congress and cause us to act in some way, shape, or form to reduce this scourge of gun violence, whether it be in tightening our nation's gun laws amongst the loosest in the first world, whether it be to pass mental health legislation that will address those that are wrestling with demons manifested eventually in gun homicides, whether it be giving more resources to law enforcement to just simply enforce the laws on the books. We've done nothing. We've done nothing since the murders in Sandy Hook, Connecticut, to address this epidemic of gun violence, and it's about time that we do. On New Year's Eve, Madam President, I spent most of that day tweeting out the 370 plus instances of mass shootings over the course of 2015. Think about that for a second. There were more mass shootings in 2015 than there were days in the year. And just to be honest, I'll tell you what I believe to be a mass shooting. I'm talking about shootings in which there were more than 4 people shot. Let me tell you, if there were more than 4 people shot in your neighborhood, that'd be something you'd probably be talking about. That would probably rise to the level of being something serious enough to change behavior or to call for a change in policy. There were 370 instances in 2015 where more than 4 people were shot at one given time, more than 1 per day. And so I tweeted out every single one of them on the day before the year turned to 2016, just to give people a sense all in one place of how big this problem of mass shootings is. But of course, that's only the tip of the iceberg. If on the average day there are 4 or 5 or 6 or 7 people being shot in episodes of mass violence, there are another 80 that are killed through other episodes of gun violence. Many of those are suicides, but many of those are just the day-to-day gun violence incidents that happen across this country, most of which happen in our cities. And so I want to share a few of those stories here with you today. A lot of the attention gets paid to those who die in episodes of mass violence. And here's just a binder that is basically full of the stories of the individuals who were killed in mass shootings over the past couple years. This doesn't even begin to account for the individuals who are just killed every day on the streets of Chicago and New Haven and Los Angeles and New Orleans. People like Jonathan Argh, who was 19 years old when he was killed just before Christmas of 2015. He was killed in the morning hours of December 8th. He had just graduated from Eli Whitney Technical High School, which is located in Hamden, Connecticut. He was just getting out of work, his cousin said. He stopped at a friend's house to talk about cars, and this senseless act of violence happened. He was quick to lend a hand when you needed help, said his cousin. He wasn't asking anything in return. He worked the 3rd shift job to come home, rest, and help his family at home. His younger sister, Genesis, said that his brother was, quote, a humble and loving person. He was a person who never picked fights. He was quick to lend a hand and needed help without asking anything. Jonathan's cousin, Edgar, said he was a very, very likable kid. He didn't have a problem with anyone. The community has been devastated by this loss. He was liked by everybody. He cared deeply for his family. Jonathan was 19 years old when he was killed after stopping at a friend's house to talk about cars after getting out of work. Theresa Wiley was killed just a few days ago in Rockford, Illinois. She was fatally shot while she was visiting a friend in her home. An unknown person forced entry into the home and shot Wiley and her friend. She lived paycheck to paycheck, but she was still immensely generous with her friends and a family, showering them with love, attention, and gifts. Her uncle said of Teresa, she didn't have children herself, but every child that she met was her child. That's why she enjoyed her work so much. She enjoyed giving back to her community because it had given her so much. Her friends described her as bubbly, angelic, lovable. Her favorite color was purple. Her favorite team was the Green Bay Packers. She loved red lipstick. She had overcome a learning disability to get a 2-year degree, and she was killed while she was studying to get her bachelor's degree. She was the most loyal and honest friend you could hope for, a friend said. I can't think of anybody who didn't like Teresa. Raven White was 16 years old when about a month ago she was killed in Birmingham, Alabama. She was fatally shot in her car in the early morning hours of January 8th. It looks like it was a robbery. She was a junior in high school, and she was 6 months pregnant. Her mother said that Raven was very outgoing. Quote, I know she loved school. Even after getting pregnant, she made good grades, and she didn't miss a day of school. She was planning to go back to the volleyball team that she played on after giving birth. She had just gotten off work at Walmart hours before the shooting. All I want is to hold my grandbaby once, said Raven's mother, Tangi Dixon, but I can't. Miguel Argh was 22 when he was killed in Bridgeport, Connecticut. He was shot in the neck and the shoulder during a shooting at the Charles F. Green Homes housing complex. Police say he wasn't the target, but he was hit by stray bullets. 22 years old. At the hospital, Miguel's mother pounded his chest, urging him to come back for life. Mommy's here. Come on, baby. Come on, baby. Mommy's here. A veteran officer said, you had the nurses crying, the priest crying, even police were crying watching this. It was one of the saddest things I've ever seen. You feel so helpless. His mother said he lit up the room when he walked in. You saw his teeth every time he smiled. He brought a smile to your face. I just want to hug him. I just want to tell him I love him. He was my protector, said his sister. He loved to make people laugh. Jabari Saunders was 30 when he was killed in December in 2015 in Wilmington. He was shot on the very same street that he used to walk his children to school every morning. He was a devoted father to 4. His life revolved around his kids, and neighbors said the only time you'd see him is with his kids. He was always smiling. It's sad. You can't even let your kids walk to school, walk to after-school stuff now. When a neighbor's son was shot, irony of all ironies, the victim's mother recalls that Jabari visited her home every single day the week after the shooting. He just came to pay respect. I know the love that he showed me when my son was killed. I can't say a bad thing about him, said another neighbor. He was just a nice guy. That's 5 stories of 2,600 a month, and there's no antidote to this epidemic. There's no one law that we can pass that makes it all better, that makes this all go away. But that can't be the excuse. The excuse can't be because there is no panacea legislatively that we shouldn't even try. The excuse can't be because it's impossible to erase gun violence that we shouldn't just take some common sense steps to make it all better. And Madam President, the excuse also can't be that laws don't make a difference, because they do. And I'll just leave you with this, because my point here is really to tell the stories of these victims, not to expound on the data, but the data is pretty irrefutable. Here are all the states where background checks are required in order to buy a gun through a private gun sale. That's in a purchase at a gun store or a purchase at a gun show. Here's all the states with no additional background checks laws besides the federal floor. And the data is pretty irrefutable. On average, there is 1 additional death per 100,000 in the states with no additional background checks laws than there are in the states that have additional background checks laws. It's a 30-some-odd% increase for the states that don't take extra steps to make sure that criminals don't get guns. And so when people say that we shouldn't pass a background checks law that 90% of the American public support because it won't make a difference, the data doesn't tell you that. The data actually tells you that if you take steps to make sure that criminals don't get guns, less criminals will get guns and less people will be killed. Because I will assure you that one of these 5 people that I just listed was killed with a gun that was purchased illegally, might have been purchased in a gun show, put into the back of a van and sold on the streets of, say, Wilmington or Bridgeport or New Haven. Laws don't save all 31,000 of these lives, but they certainly will save a handful. And for the individuals, the nurses and the clergy and the police officers who witnessed Miguel Argüelles' mother pressing on his heart, trying to get him to come back to life, just simply one less death would make a debate on the Senate floor worth it. I hope that we take some steps this year, perhaps to pass a mental health reform bill. I hope that we get to where 9 out of 10 of our constituents are and pass legislation that keeps guns out of the hands of criminals. And if we don't do it because of the statistics, maybe we'll do it because we start to hear the real voices of these victims. I yield the floor.